All right, let's get started. Welcome everybody. Glad that you're here. Um, know why we're all here, right? This big changes is coming down the pipe for us in mining, and a few housekeeping items. Please keep your mics muted. We are doing a Zoom meeting instead of a webinar, so keep your mics muted to help facilitate this. If you do have questions or comments, decent chance we will answer those just through the presentation itself. So write them down, and then you can send them in the chat at the towards the end if they haven't been answered. I do have availability. Stick around for a little bit at the end, help answer questions, specific questions you may have, because obviously we're not going to be able to cover all 700 pages of this new standard, in this hour presentation. So new standard is almost 700 pages, 691 pages, much better written than the proposed standard. Thankfully, proposed standard was garbage. This one is a lot better written. So we'll kind of break down what these mean, but while I have gone through and as I've read this new standard, it is still new, right? Came out on Tuesday this week. We are actively digesting it and seeing what it's actually going to mean, and then obviously there's what MSHA and how they're actually going to enforce it compared to what it's written. And again, as a reminder, if you have questions, write them down. You can shoot them in the chat so that we can get to those at the end. We'll not take any questions till the very end, or you can raise your hand at the end or whatever and ask the questions. So housekeeping items, additional housekeeping items, so you know who we are. We are MSHA Safety Services. We do Part 46 and 48 safety training virtually and in person. We work with close to 500 companies now providing quality, timely training. We're also an industrial hygiene firm. The main difference between us and a lot of other training companies is that we are miners and we work solely in mining. We do a pretty good job with that. Personally, I'm an industrial hygienist. I went to school for industrial hygiene, and I really enjoy doing it. And so we get the opportunity to work with companies all over the United States, supporting them and helping them understand compliance, maintain compliance, and then if they get caught up in some litigation with the feds, we also help support them through that process. And we do noise and dust, right? We do so much noise and dust. So a big part of who we are. Timeline, right? The final rule was announced April 16th, Tuesday this week, with it being published yesterday, April 18th. It goes into effect in 60 days, June 17th, 2024, with full coal compliance of June 17th of 25 and full metal, non-metal compliance of June 17th, 2026. When I got into consulting, when I got into mining, early 2010s. I worked for a company called Rio Tinto, right? Big mining company. Worked for them for a little over a year. Moved up to Wyoming. Worked for a company called FMC/Tronox. And I thought mining in the United States looked like that. Mine sites with 1,000+ employees. It wasn't until I actually got into consulting about 4 years ago now that I found out that mining is vastly different in the United States. When the Mine Safety and Health Act was passed in 1977, mining looked a lot different than it does today. And these changes, while they're going to affect all of us, for facilities that do not have engineering controls in place, this is going to be a much more challenging standard to follow. And we can look at the breakdown of mines in the United States, and 91.7% of all mines in the United States have less than 20 employees at them. A lot of you guys here probably fit into that category. A lot of the companies that we work with also fit into that category. And the standard is for every mine. Doesn't matter if you've got 2 people at it, or, 2,500 like Rio Tinto Kennecott does. That is who it's for. So what happens is MSHA's adding a new Part 60. So 30 CFR Part 60 respirable crystalline silica standard. This is a unified rule for both metal, non-metal, and coal. There are numerous differences written in the standard for coal versus metal, non-metal. I will cover, a lot of those similarities and stuff, but takeaway for you guys, this is definitely going to be geared a little more towards metal, non-metal than coal specifically, this presentation. But there are still fairly significant similarities, sampling, medical surveillance. In coal, right, we'll be pulling from section 70 and 90, and those will be moved into this section 60 as well. Reading through the standard, I really do want to thank a couple of companies specifically. These companies were actually specifically called out in the standard and helped get some things changed that were very, very beneficial. Obviously, MSHA Safety Services, us, we made a lot of comments. We spoke, I personally went and spoke in Arlington and in Denver about our concerns with the standard. Specifically with an action limit of 25, a compliance date of 180 days, like those were just really felt pretty unreasonable. Especially when you look at fatal cases, not fatal cases, but actual cases of silicosis and pneumoconiosis of metal, non-metal. I pulled all that data before speaking and brought up my concerns because over the past 10 years of metal, non-metal, out of about 200,000 miners, we've only had 20 cases. So we went out, we're active. We made comments too on the record. NSSGA did, Nevada Gold Mines, Nevada Mining Association, Arizona Mining Association, and Compliance Safety Services. If you know Kim Redding over there, pretty awesome guy. Tata Chemicals, CISC, Portland Cement, Silica Safety Coalition, National Lime Association, Jervois, Idaho, great people up there in the mountains, Idaho. Essential Minerals Association, U.S. Silica, K&E, Excavating, B&B Roads, and anyone else not mentioned. Those comments can make the difference. And we'll talk about a few of those comments that were actually made that changed things to really help benefit us and help how the final standard came out. So here is the breakdown ultimately of the new standard. 30 CFR Part 60, right? We got our scope, definitions, our Pell, what methods of compliance look like, exposure monitoring, corrective actions, respiratory protection, medical surveillance for metal and non-metal mines, and then record keeping and severability. So we'll kind of briefly go through those, talking at a fairly high level. Ultimately, right, we all know currently the exposure limit's at roughly 100 micrograms, but in 59 days from today, June 17th, right, well, ultimately, I guess in 2 years for metal, non-metal, 1 year for coal, we will be dropping that to 50 micrograms for that Pell. And there is an action limit now set at 25 micrograms per cubic meter of air. And remember, these are all based on an 8-hour time-weighted average, meaning MSHA is assuming an 8-hour working shift, which reading through the standard, right, about 22% of mines only work 8-hour shifts. So most mines work 10 or 12-hour shifts. We recommended that MSHA follow NIOSH's recommendation, which is a 10-hour shift, and MSHA said, no, we're doing an 8-hour shift. We put that in our comments out there as well. So for methods of compliance, ultimately, big picture, MSHA is relying on engineering controls to protect miners from the hazards with a secondary control of administrative controls. What that means is all mine operators are going to be required to install, use, and maintain feasible engineering and administrative controls, right? Engineering controls are going to be that primary source versus administrative controls. So examples, this could be ventilation systems, dust suppression systems, enclosed cabs or booths, control booths with filtered air. We work with Quartz Mining Company up in the Pacific Northwest, and they run HEPA filters on their crusher operator in his booth. and control access to contaminated air via that, right? Positive pressure inside that control room. But what you guys need to start thinking about, right, is changes in material handling, where your dust is coming from. Is it a transfer point, right? Is it from belt to belt? Is it coming off the crusher? Because we have to look at these. Is it just dry roads, right? Can you add a bag house? Is it feasible to add a bag house, right? Those costs are pretty astronomical, plus permitting with the DEQ or EPA, depending on who you have in those areas. Other methods of compliance, administrative controls, right? When MSHA is talking about administrative controls, what they're talking about is housekeeping. So cleaning up spills, body position of miners. This is very significant. As an industrial hygienist, when we're actually out doing personal monitoring on people, this is a huge part of exposure. How are you cleaning it up? Are you keeping your cabs clean inside your loaders and your excavators? Are you cleaning up those spills in a timely manner? Are you helping to reduce the fugitive dust? Are you keeping contaminants off of clothes, right? When we're talking at 25 micrograms for an action level, contaminated clothes are going to contribute towards that. Very explicitly, MSHA called out a normal administrative control that I think about, and that I think most companies think about, and NIOSH even recommends, is rotation of miners, where you only have a miner do a task for 2 hours a day because it's got higher potential exposure. Good example that would be like cleaning screens, or running the crusher, or doing some belt servicing while it's running. MSHA explicitly prohibited rotation of miners as an admin control, meaning you have to figure out engineering controls to reduce potential exposures. And PPE, we always think about PPE, and a lot of us use PPE right now. But MSHA has referenced ASTM F3387, the 2019 edition, by reference as a requirement to operators who can be above the PEL and have to temporarily use respirators. So we'll talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes. But if you are going to go to PPE, right, PPE is not a control source. MSHA does not recognize that at all in this new standard. It's only used if you have a sample come back above the PEL, and you must put your next shift workers in a respirator, and you must immediately start adding engineering controls to reduce their exposure to below the permissible exposure limit. So when I say PEL, I guess make that clear, that stands for permissible exposure limit, which is 50 micrograms. So examples, right? We've got to be looking at wet methods. If we're making dust, bag houses, magging roads, if we need to. To know what the exposure is, right, we need to do baseline sampling for each miner who can be exposed to this. RCS stands for respirable crystalline silica, right? Not all silica is created equal, but we're specifically looking at respirable crystalline silica. Typically comes from quartz and cristabolite. MSHA has said in the standard that who needs to be sampled, right? We're talking about quantitative, right? These are actual employees at your facilities that need to be sampled. We have to get a baseline for anybody who can be reasonably expected. And that is almost anybody working at the mine site. Scale house, if you can show that there's not going to be an exposure because it's a long ways away from the pit and it's paved roads, then we could remove them. But for the most part, they said reasonably expected is pretty much everything. So we're going to pull our first sample and we're going to see where they're at, right? And then we need to do another sample. MSHA said we have to have 2 samples for basically each exposure group. And MSHA has actually broken that out by shift. So say you run multiple shifts, right? You need to do at least 2 samples. So if you got 3 loader operators, a couple of excavator operators, and then some ground guys, right? If you say these loader operators are all doing the same task, then you only have to have 2 total samples for all of those loader operators. In industrial hygiene, we call that similar exposure groups, but you need to evaluate your guys and say, how many of these do we actually need a sample? And then we start pulling data, right? We do this sampling where we put an industrial hygiene pump on them, and we send that, those results to lab to find out what their exposure potential is, and we get that data. If it's after our first sample, if it's less than 25, we pull another sample. If it comes back at less than 25, then you guys are in good shape. We're in good shape. And at that point, we'll talk about it, but you just have to go to some qualitative assessments every 6 months. If it's more than 25, but less than 50, right? 25 is that action limit. 50 is the exposure level that we're allowed to go to. Then you must do quarterly sampling on each of those groups, which is sampling at least every 3 months. If it's greater than that 50 micrograms, we got to put them in a respirator, right? We got to notify at least the next shift as soon as we find out. And then we have to look at our engineering controls to see what our potential is. Anyone involved with the moving or handling of ore, that's likely to expose to respirable crystalline silica, they're going to fit in that category. So gut check, how do you know if you're potentially going to have some issues? I got some pictures now that I've taken at some mines that we work with, and you can see how it will compare to your facility potentially, right? Here's a loader right here, Komatsu feeding a crusher. We got a jaw right here, right, running over here. Got a water truck running, but you can see this dust coming off, right? Here's another picture. See this visible dust cloud right here. Our belt techs on this day of sampling came back at 100 micrograms. 100 micrograms, double the new standard. Pretty bad issues. We had no issues with the guys in the cabs, but they replaced their cabin filters on a pretty often frequency. Every 4 weeks, they were replacing their cabin filters. They would have all been below that 25 micrograms. Here's another picture. This is at another crushing facility, right? We got a cone right here, cone crusher. We got our excavator over here feeding, but you can see this visible dust coming off, right? This facility would have significant issues meeting the new standard, right? You guys can see these pictures. This processing, right? This is a portable plant, semi-portable, whatever. They've done a good job at putting belting up along the bottom, right, to capture this fugitive dust. But at this facility, we'd have to look at adding spray bars, right? Spraying on the feed pile. We'd have to probably add some spray over here in this cone. We got to get this fugitive dust down. Here's another example, right? This is a screen building closed off. You can see the accumulation on these rafters and beams. If somebody had to come in here and pull samples, right, lift this up, pull samples off the screen while it's running, which is a fairly common job, they would have issues with compliance, depending upon how long they were up here, how much, what percent silica they actually had in their ore body and stuff. But this facility would be high risk, in my eyes, very high risk for not meeting compliance with the new standard. So again, as a reminder, right, if you have not started sampling, if you have no idea what your baseline is for your employees, now is a time to start getting that. You got to start spending time thinking about that and wrapping your head around it, so you have time to look at some engineering controls, bring in a consultant or whatever to help you figure that out, or start trying stuff. So if your sampling results show up between 25 and 50 micrograms, you are on that periodic sampling timeline where you must sample your guys at least every 3 months, until 2 samples in a row come back below the action limit at 25 micrograms per meter cubed. If you are working in visible dust clouds at least some part of the day, you will not be below 25 micrograms. Right, detectable limits on our sampling are around 7 or 8 micrograms. So we're only talking a 2.5x, 3x above that is where we're at with these results. So And then quantitative, right? If it comes back above 50 micrograms, you must do corrective actions immediately by the next shift of when you find out, and then resample and verify that you're below 50 micrograms. If you're still not, then you got to do more corrective actions, right? And that cycle continues until a sample result comes back below 50 micrograms. And then you're back to that periodic sampling. If it comes back less than 25, once you put those engineering controls in place, you must resample again within 3 months. And if you're less than, then you can just go back to you can just go to qualitative, right? Every 6-month review of what that sampling looks like. So here's an example. I pulled this off of the MDRS Mine Data Retrieval System off MSHA's website because I wanted to show this was a facility that has never had an issue before with silica, right? No cases of silicosis, never had an issue. They had sampling right back in 2019 by MSHA. They came out, they did some sampling. There was more than 1% quartz in their ore body, and their results came back at 0.35 milligrams. This person now, right, this truck driver job, because it's at this equates to 35 micrograms. This would be a quarterly sampling employee now, right? And this is a truck driver, right? So you're going to look at closing your windows and putting, cabin filters on, whatever, making sure that we're replacing those. Here was another sample result right here, right? They had a laborer, bull gang, MSHA classified them as that, whatever they were, shoveling up, housekeeping issues or whatever. Their results came back at 0.47. While this may not be above the exposure limit of 50, right? This is 47. This is definitely a quarterly, every 3-month sampling event person now, right? They've never had any issues in the past. Just because you may not have ever had any issues in the past doesn't mean you may not have issues in the future. So we've got to start thinking about this. Who are our guys? Who's most at risk? Let's start sampling, right? Gathering some data so that you can build a plan on how to, reduce their exposures in the future as well. So going to quantitative and qualitative, right? So this quantitative is what we've been doing, right? This is where we go out and physically sample and we gather specific measurable data from a lab, and then we make, we make evaluations and recommendations and change things inside our facility using engineering controls. What we have to do once we get to that 25 microgram level, then we have to do semi-annual qualitative evaluations. So that's where we basically do a risk assessment. Have we changed any production, any processing, engineering controls? Is our ore body different, right, that we're getting from, right, geological characteristics that could change our potential exposure? If nothing's changed, we document this, right, on a form, and then we put it in our file for when MSHA shows up so that we can verify that, hey, we're doing our job. This must happen every 6 months. We take this, we also have to post this on a bulletin board for 31 days. So that could be an online bulletin board, it could be a physical bulletin board. I forgot to mention, when we're taking our samples as well, all of that data must be published as well for our employees to review and read for the same 31 days. This begins 6 months after the effective date of the rule, the semi-annual evaluation, right? So we'd be looking at December 17th, 2025 for coal, and December 17th, 2026 for metal, non-metal is when we have to start doing these semi-annual qualitative evaluations. There are a few exceptions to that, and that's if you're running portable crushers or you're an intermittent facility, which save those questions for the end. We can help answer those questions. But if an evaluation shows a miner may be exposed above the action level of 25, you have to do sampling again. So if there's changes and you're like, I don't know, you must sample again those guys that, those employees that could be at risk to verify that they're still below the 25 or they're above the 25, and you need to put more engineering controls in place to keep them below the PEL, permissible exposure limit of 50, and hopefully get them below that 25. So the goal is obviously going to be to get everybody below the 25. So you do not have to do quarterly sampling. That is just a mess to do. But that is not going to be possible for everybody. That is not going to be possible for everybody. So if you are an underground mining operation, good luck. That is all I've got to say. Not to minimize it. It will be challenging at best. Continuing, right, sampling requirements, right? You collect the samples for the full shift. That's what MSHA says. Doing typical mining activities, right? We want to get representative samples, right? So you're going to sample like you normally are. Those samples, right, when they're set up, they need to be within 1 foot of the mouth, right? We call this the breathing zone. So it's within 1 foot of the mouth there. Miners performing the same task, same shift, same work area. We can classify those together, right? I told you the loaders, right? You got these 3 loader operators doing the same job. We only need to get 2 data points on them, especially if they're below that 25 microgram action limit. And then we just put them on our cycle, maintenance cycle of doing our qualitative assessments on them. MSHA has classified a representative fraction as just 2 miners doing the same task on the same shift. Again, if we're running 2 separate shifts or 3 shifts, then we've got to sample each one of those shifts. Right? Hope that makes sense. We cannot just take it from 1 shift. That was very explicitly written out in the final standard. That's crazy to me, but doesn't matter. That's what's written in the standard. And that's what it takes for compliance. Sampling devices, right? They must meet this ISO 7708, and you must use an ISO 17025 accredited labs. So there's a bunch of those around. We use a lab called SAI out of North Carolina. They are very awesome, good to work with. There's labs like SKC or SGS or Bureau Veritas, right? There's a lot of good labs to choose from in the United States. But you must make sure that you're following the correct sampling method, right? So typically when I submit my results, right, I ask and say, hey, I need this in the NIOSH 7500 or the OSHA 142, right? But they must use this X-ray diffraction for that. So when you're talking to your lab or you're developing a relationship with the lab, or if you have questions, we'd be happy to recommend a lab or whatever to you. You need to make sure you're following this sampling method, right? And so you can actually Google NIOSH 7500 method, and it will tell you how to do the samples, right? Some of the basic requirements for that. I still, even though I've been doing this for well over 10 years, the sampling, very hands-on sampling, I still review that NIOSH 7500 method very frequently to make sure I'm following the procedure correctly. So I know that I'm getting the right data and good data that can be used and hold up in a court of law as well. So we do the sampling, right? We collect the record. When we're documenting the sampling, we must include on that record the sample date, the occupation, and then what we get as our results, right? We must post those and the lab report for 31 days after we receive it. So that our miners can review those. And we have to keep those records for at least 5 years. So this was a big change from the proposed standard. The proposed standard said 2 years. MSHA changed that to 5 years. So we've got to keep these records for 5 years. So again, as a reminder to get our head in the right spot, right? If a sample shows above 50 micrograms, we have to make respirators available to affected miners before start of their next shift. We must ensure they're worn during the full shift or doing activities that could, cause overexposure, specific activities. And then we must take immediate corrective actions, meaning adding more water, right? Increasing ventilation, improving maintenance, right? Cleaning up, housekeeping. We have to look at our engineering administrative controls to make sure that they are sufficient, and we have to drop their exposure. We make a record and document those corrective actions that we did. We have to document those. And we have to retain those for at least 5 years. So we're keeping track of their sampling results and corrective actions that we took and retain those for at least 5 years. So you guys start documenting now. Even if you have no data, I recommend start documenting now what you are changing in engineering controls to prove that you are trying to meet compliance with the standard. This is going to make a difference. So document now, right? Are you increasing how much water you're putting down on roads? Are you magging your roads? You didn't do that before. Magnesium chloride on those. What are you doing? Let's document those now, so that you guys can really start getting ready and prepping and keeping yourself compliant and safe. So respiratory protection, operators required to provide miners with NIOSH approved respirators. MSHA recommends very, very heavily that these are 100 series, right? Which are not N95s or dust masks. They must, they should be high efficient. So we're talking, reusable half face, right? Air purifying respirator, or a powered air purifying respirator, right? Where you put your whole face in, right? It's got a pump and you're running it through a P100 cartridge. But we're looking at these 100 series, which would be a reusable half face. They do make some dust masks that are 100 series, a P100 dust mask, but they are significantly more expensive than an N95. So MSHA is very clear that they recommend, right? This is not a specific requirement, but they strongly recommend anybody follow this. So as part of that, right, if you're going to potentially be above that, you must have a respiratory protection program that meets this ASTM standard. Where you have, and your written program must include program administration, all of these things need to be found in this program. And I was reading through the standard, and one thing that kind of threw me off and really surprised me is that MSHA said we have to have written SOPs for using respiratory protection. And that one really surprised me. So you have to have a standard operating procedure on how to use your respirator, how to don it, how to clean it, all of those things. You have to have written SOPs for that. That was one of the things just tucked in there when I was reading it. And I was just like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. Fun thought, right? I'm not saying anything big and be of, but MSHA couldn't enforce the COVID face mask mandate because MSHA did not have a standard requiring that. This new one will now, there's a standard that will be requiring it. If we ever had a situation like that again, MSHA could enforce wearing face masks at your facility because of this standard now tucked into this Part 60. So MSHA could not enforce that during COVID, right? Whatever, take it for however it is. But that is something that now could be doing. And as I was thinking about this, I was just like, oh my gosh, yep, they got lots more options. So this will not be limited to just dust exposure as well, right? If you weld on stainless steel and you got hexavalent chromium, right, for chrome 6 exposure, this respiratory protection standard that they put underneath this dust standard can now tie you into a whole bunch of other potential hazards that miners could face. So if you're working at a facility, right, that does a whole bunch of welding or fabrication or whatever, this standard will apply to you more than just dust. So start thinking about that. If you have questions about that, save and put them in the chat, whatever, or you can reach out to me offline and we can talk about that. So okay, now the medical surveillance piece. So we talked about the new standard, the 50 micrograms. We talked about the action limit of 25. We talked about the ASTM, right? Respirator standard you have to meet. This is the new medical surveillance that's going to be required, right? All operators are going to be required to provide exams for all of their employees within 60 days of employment, where they go in and they get a medical evaluation from a primary licensed healthcare physician, right? That's what this PLHCP stands for, or a specialist, right? Where they go through all this stuff, your past and present work exposures, any illnesses, any of these things. It includes a chest x-ray that must be reviewed by a certified NIOSH B reader, very clear in there. And if you're going to wear respirators, right, your guys now need to get a pulmonary function test, right, administered by a spirometry tech. That's a mouthful. And So you're looking at lung capacity inside of those people that are gonna have to wear respirators. So you've got to go through this whole process now. For any new miners coming onto your facility. If you have existing miners, right, experienced miners that you're hiring on, or you already have existing miners, which a lot of you guys do, right, you must offer voluntary exams at least every 4.5 years for your current miners, where they have a 6-month window open to go in and go get this full medical evaluation completed. So for any new miners coming in, right, they've got 60 days, within 60 days of employment, they must go in. For new miners, they have to do a mandatory follow-up exam within 3 years. If there is showing signs, because some people have shown signs very quickly to long-term health effects, they have a third mandatory within 2 years. But it is not mandatory for newly hired experienced miners. That is just part of that cycle where you hire them and you must offer it to them for 6 months. And the law said you have to offer it from 3.5 years to 4.5 years from their previous offered one for a 6-month window where they can go in and get these voluntary medical exams. We were initially, MSHA put this down as 30 days, within 30 days of employment. We talked to some of our clients, and that was just not feasible because of the turnover, because of the location, right, the remoteness of their work site. And we made comments in Denver, and MSHA listened to our comments and pushed us out to 60 days. I consider that a pretty good win. That's why you got to make comments when these standards are coming out. You've got to be actively involved in making comments so you can get some of these things changed. It was only 30-day change, but that's pretty significant. If your guys are falling off at 45 days or whatever, you don't have to run them through this, right? It's only within 60 days of employment. So once they get these results, right, these results are kept confidential and only provided to the miner, right? Mine operators do not get these medical exam results. They get within 30 days a written opinion from the medical professional on any limitations with that miner. So reminder, right? As a mine operator, mine owner, you do not get these results from your employees. The employees get the results. You get a written letter within 30 days stating if they have any restrictions or limitations, right? But we have to keep these records, right? These written records that we get for the miner's duration of employment plus 6 months. We've got to keep all of these determination records, written medical opinion records for that 30 days, or for that miner's employment plus 6 months. Got to be there. Okay, let's talk about contractors for a second, right? You have contractors working at your facility. This is pulled straight from it, right? I copied and pasted this. Consistent with the Mine Act, MSHA's existing standards, and the agency's longstanding policy, independent contractors engaged in the following mining activities: construction, maintenance, and drilling are required to comply with the requirements of this final rule outside of the mine operator. So they must do it. You guys are mine operators, right? You got guys doing this for you. You must ensure that they're meeting it, right? Because you can be liable as well if they're working underneath your mine ID at the time. For example, MSHA expects, on the other side though, if you are a production operator, right, and you outsource your hauling, any part of that, you are responsible for those independent contractors that are performing that service for you, right? That was taken straight from page 245. Pretty exciting stuff. That is my basic overview, right? So you guys know we've got a few things together. We're actually going to be offering classes, 2-day hands-on industrial hygiene classes across the United States over the next few months, where we can teach your guys how to do MSHA, how to do the sampling, right? And it's similar to the class that the MSHA inspectors go and get in Beckley, West Virginia, except for ours a little bit better. But we do 1 day of classroom and 1 day in the field, right, where we actually go and put pumps on people and do that. We also doing classes for managers and supervisors and upper managers on how to analyze results, right? You get your lab results or MSHA shows up to your facility. What are the questions you need to ask those MSHA inspectors to ensure that they're actually going to get a good sample, right? That's really, really important. I've had issues with MSHA inspectors in the past where they've showed up and they haven't pre-calibrated their pumps, right? That's a big, big no-no. And that data, if you ask them the right questions, right, that data is no good that they're going to get, right? They need to go away and go calibrate their pumps if they're going to sample at our facilities. We also offer full service industrial hygiene support, right? We can help create your programs. We can help, create your respiratory protection programs and your industrial hygiene programs. And we also, offer a variety of custom stuff. In the standard as well, MSHA said, if you do not meet the standard once compliance goes in, this is from page 233, then it could merit a withdrawal order of your miners from the mining operation, right? This is a big deal. We have to make sure that we're meeting this. And if you have questions about portable crushing operations or seasonal operators, right, get with us to help answer those questions. You can reach out to me directly. My email, dj@mshasafetyservices.com. Or, call us at that 307-227-6742. Or, you're welcome to, I open up my calendar the next few weeks. You guys can scan this, right, and schedule a free 15-minute discussion with me to ask me some questions about your specific facility, what we think or whatever. But you can scan this, take a picture of this, with your phone, pull it up and use this QR code to do it. But let's go to some questions now. Happy to go to some questions. What my email?
Did you have questions coming your way via email?
Okay, thanks, Jeff. I'm gonna pull this over so it's not done. Put you on the spot like that. Okay, Cole Logue asked a question. What if we have operations that already use rotation of miners during their normal working shift? For instance, if you have a crusher operator that also performs maintenance and he is rotating through the day to perform maintenance or other tasks, I have at least 3 operations that are doing this currently. That is a great question, Cole. So if that's part of their job, right, it's not for exposure, but it's part of their job, that's different, right? MSHA said it has to be that you're doing that for reducing their exposure. Then that's outside of the realm, right? That's not to reduce their exposure. That's part of their shift, and that is completely different. So we work with some operations that have been doing rotation for years to keep employee exposures down to the current 100 microgram. And it's companies like that are really going to struggle. Great question, Cole. David Wacker, what about contractors doing crushing for our company? They need to be doing their own sampling, but you guys are at risk if they're not, right? So as an operator, you've got to ensure that they are doing their own sampling. Because they are, acting as the mine operator, even though you're contracting that out, they must do their own sampling, and it's up to you guys to ensure that you're protected by them doing their own stuff. Great question. Mike, as a mine operator, are we responsible for third-party contractors? And that depends, right? Depends on what they're doing at your facility. But you are always responsible. As the mine operator, you are 100% responsible for every single miner on your lease. So I hope I answered that question. John, what if both our historical data and MSHA's historical data demonstrate that there is no silica? Do we still need a sample? The answer is yes. MSHA in the proposed standard said that was that they were going to accept data within the past 2 years. In the final standard, MSHA said no, we don't accept any previously accrued data. All data has to be new. So you got your metal non-metal, you got 2 years. Coal, you got 1 year to gather that data. Does sampling need to occur if a mine is in a non-producing state? Great question. Depends. What is your potential risk for respirable crystalline silica exposure, right? If it's reasonably likely they could be exposed, then you must sample, right? That was that trigger in the thing. John, I don't know how to say it, Heiser, probably get with me offline and we can talk more about your specific facility and see what would be best. Joel Trevino, where's the best location to extract the sample and how much will be needed? I think we answered that, right? You got to have at least 2 data points. That sample must be within the breathing zone, that personal sample, that breathing zone on the employees. Angela Fields, where can we receive training to become trained to take samples? So there will be numerous classes, I'm sure, but feel free to get with us. We'll be offering classes, teaching people how to do it, questions to ask the MSHA inspectors when they show up, how to really get prepared for that. Can we review historical IH to determine if there is exposure reasonably expected? Review 10 years. I feel like that's pretty reasonable, Brian. Great thought, right? Where you guys have that many sample data. Honestly, MSHA said reach out to your local district. I would call your local district manager. If you have that much data, hundreds of samples with that much below the action limit, definitely reach out to your district manager. Say, here's all this data. Nobody in these groups is reasonably likely to be exposed because we have this data proving that. And I think that's very, very reasonable. If you want help putting together, a discussion for that, reach out, let me know. Samuel Herrera. Okay, we'll get you some of that information. So those, Jeff asked a question, right? What about medical exams and fit testing? Those must be done upon, within 60 days of employment. So we are doing those well before, we come to that situation. So, we got to be doing those fit tests and those med exams well before our employees, can be in one of those situations. Ron Lindsay said, can we distribute results to all rather than post? That was what the law said. I think that's reasonable, right? Where you just ship them out to everybody so that they know, because that's equivalent of electronically posting them. I don't see any issues with that. Again, that could be a question for district manager to answer because district managers control each of those districts that we work in and do stuff in. Oh, there it is. Sarah Nichols said Nevada Mining Association conducts a 3-day IH hands-on workshop, and they're getting ready to set up dates as well. There'll be other options to do this with a lot of different companies. Chris Warnick said in Huzzah, West Virginia, they'll be training on the SKC PPIs, right? Because you got to have the right sampling stuff. SKC is a really sweet option with no cyclone on it for doing sampling. Where do you find a certified B reader? Ken Cunningham asked that. Great question. Cannot answer that question for you. This was one of the biggest biggest struggles. Beef, probably not the right word. Biggest struggle that we were having with it. There's 130 NIOSH B readers in the United States. That's it. But MSHA said that was, and NIOSH both said that was plenty to analyze all of these results. So what we're going to have to do is get with our local primary licensed healthcare physicians and ensure that those results are getting sent to B readers. So we'll have to talk with them and get that set up. A lot of the places that we work with, a lot of these companies we work with, we're going to have to be getting those questions set up. And yeah, great question. Follow-up regarding PPE and exposure. What if an employee decides against wearing a respirator? Would a signed document stating so be sufficient? No, it is a condition of employment. So they cannot refuse to wear a respirator. They refuse, it's a condition of employment. So you can either get a PAPR, right, a powered air purifying respirator for them to wear, or that is the expectation, right? And this will have to be communicated with all of our guys. You cannot just sign away and say, I'm not going to do it like you can with the hearing test, right? I'm not going to do the hearing test. James Dodson, you state medical surveillance is required no matter whether minors potentially exposed to respiratory crystalline sot. Is there a requirement for a minor who does not need or is expected to need to use respiratory protection? That medical surveillance is still required. You may not have to do a fit test for them though, right? If they're never, ever going to be in a situation where they have to wear one. But that's what the standard says. You still have to do that medical surveillance for everybody. hiring on. More questions. When do you have to notify MSHA if exceeding the Pell? Great question. I did not answer that one. Immediately, right? MSHA opened with coal, right? They've got this thing where you upload your samples, and this is how MSHA is going to manage this program. It's going to be so easy for them. You're going to upload your results. This is the gospel according to DJ right now. Not sure exactly how. We'll have to call and notify, right? We got our list already of if we have a fire, right? If we've got a trapped miner for more than 30 minutes, if we have an accident that could become a fatality, we got to notify MSHA, right? This will be one of those criteria for notifying MSHA. We'll notify them, but ultimately, it looks like MSHA has built this database where we will submit our samples to them, and they can just write us tickets from Beckley, West Virginia. Now you have to come out to our facilities, and we will manage their job for them. So great. Jacob Baxter, same question here about notifying MSHA if exceeding the Pell. Do we think just after compliance dates? Oh, yes. Yeah, this will be after compliance dates. So we do not have to follow this stuff, right? This is not metal, non-metal, right? We got June 17th, 2026. Coal, this is June 17th, 2025, right? We'll have to start notifying at that point. At that point. Not until that point, but at that point. Josh Johnson posted, Carroll Technologies Group can help with sampling products, safety products. Know Josh really well. We'll probably do a webinar in the near future with Josh and some other people, a Q&A panel, right, to help answer a lot more specific questions on these topics. And we'll bring Carroll Engineering in and probably NIST Global to help with those that Q&A. Bobby Doyle, do we need medical surveillance even if our levels are below 25 micro? We're going to say 25 micrograms, right? 0.25 milligrams. And the answer is yes. Everybody's going to get medical surveillance. A couple more questions. Is there a reasonable time allowed for respiratory protection if we are above 50? What's the limit for respirator time allowed? Until we fix the problem, and we must do immediately, right? This is where our documentation is going to be important. It's a great question from Chad. We must ensure that we are actively working immediately to reduce our, increase our controls, to reduce our exposures. And MSHA will be looking at that because we're documenting all that, right? Just like we do with our workplace exams and we do with our pre-shift inspections on vehicles now, right, with that power mobile equipment standard. But we're documenting that stuff, and we're proving that we're actively working on it. There is no time frame denoted anywhere in the standard. That will be up to the authorized agent from the assistant secretary, right, aka the MSHA person who's there at your facility reviewing what you're doing. Will this presentation be available? I'm recording it. I have not had great success with recording these and making them available. I'm going to try to do that. I will do a follow-up with this as well. And there'll be, again, I'm on LinkedIn, active on LinkedIn. If you're not connected with me, connect with me on LinkedIn. We post a lot of stuff, and I'll be posting a lot of different stuff on this for the next little bit. Donnie Vig asked, can you give me types of sampling devices to use? Yeah, this is personal exposure pump, typically with a cassette, 37 millimeter cassette, with a cyclone on the bottom, or you can use the SKCs, but that's a great question. I'm going to put some notes together for what type of sampling material and what you should be looking at buying. You can also get with Carroll Technologies, right? They'll be able to help sell you, set you up very well with the right material. Is there a difference? Ron Lindsay asks, is there a difference for office employees versus field employees? Yes. Are they reasonably likely, end quote, right? That's what the quote that was specifically put in there, to be exposed to respirable crystalline silica above the action level. Office employees, if they work in the office solely or 98% of the time, I would assume that's not reasonably likely to be exposed, would not sample them. I would make a note about that, what my justification was, why we're not sampling them, and move on. Justice Carter, what if an employee who is required to wear a respirator has a beard? Then you must manage your people, or get them a PAPR, right? This is just a management issue. This is the law. We meet the law, right? We know the law. and we meet the law. And no ifs, ands, or buts about that. No ZZ top here, right? Unless you got a PAPR, right? So the only respirator you can wear is a non-tight fitting respirator. That's called a powered air purifying respirator. 3M makes a great product. The TR series, right? And this is the thing where you got this backpack that you're wearing with a pump on it, with a hose that comes up. They got their own special hard hat, and it blows air down your face. And blowing that air creates this positive pressure, pushing out all those particles. And those are good for areas up to 25 times the exposure limit, right? They're very, very good, widely accepted, widely used. MSHA just doesn't accept them, for long-term control of exposures. The rest of the known world does, for sure, just not MSHA. But if they're going to wear one of those, you have to look at buying one of those, and the price of those just keeps going up. It's like $3,000 now to get one of those, but they're good for a long time. You just have to get extra filters, right, and battery packs that you charge them. Make sure that they're going to last you the shift. What about Brandon Henry asks, what about stockpiles exposure? I can't answer that question. I got no idea, right? We're blowing dust off the stockpile, right? I live in Wyoming, right? We all know a couple of things that happen in Wyoming. One, winter lasts all year long. They always got road construction, and the wind always blows, and just the way it is. So, we may have different things we got to deal with. We work with sand mines in West Texas, right? They got wind problems, and that's blowing off the desert, right? It's what they're mining, but it's blowing off the desert. Do they got to deal with that? Yeah, they do, right? And that's going to be challenging. Brandon, maybe, you can set up a time with me and we can help go through some specifics. You can show some pictures with me and stuff. We can talk through it or look at some other things. Joe asked Matthias if this recording will be available. I'm hoping to. I'm recording it. Hopefully it's we can publish this for you guys. It would be a tech issue on my side if I can't, but I'm still a millennial, so hopefully I can figure something out. Is there any guidance with Pell reporting related to calculated with the shift and error factors? Yes, Curtis, I did not even talk about that. So it's an 8-hour time weighted average, right? That's what our exposures are based upon. Only 22% of mines actually work 8-hour shifts. So if you're working a 10-hour shift or a 12-hour shift, your exposure limit's not 50. It's going to be calculated down based upon your exposure. If you're working a 12-hour shift, realistically, your exposure limit's about 38 micrograms. 38. That's crazy. And that's challenging. So I'll send that out. I'm going to make a note of that. And I'll put that in there as well. So what sampling stuff you're going to need. I'll send this out to the whole list. Let me make a note real quick. And the calculation on how to do for shifts longer than 8 hours, right? That calculation was put in there, but the base default is 8 hours. We pushed back hard against this. We were really the only organization. We were actually published in the final rule as a company that pushed back against this. AIHA, right, actually recommended they go to 25 micrograms. We said 50 was unreasonable based upon cases in the past. And it is what it is, right? We're at 50 now. But we also recommended that they go to the NIOSH level, which was a 10-hour exposure. And MSHA said, no, we're doing the more protective. So they went to an 8-hour time-weighted average exposure calc. So anything outside of that, we have to run the calcs. The lab can help do that for you, though, if you tell them that this was a 10 or 12-hour shift, right? So lab guidance, right? Maybe we'll do something on lab guidance, how to do that. But that's it for right now. Good question. All right. Any other questions you guys have? Anybody have questions they want to ask? You can raise your hand. They got that hand emoji. You can raise it and unlock it.
DJ, there is one other question in the chat room that I did not capture and get that to you.
Okay.
That question is, does the PAPR use negate any fit test requirements from Ryan Nurnberger?
Great question. Yes. You still have to do the tidal volume, right? The spirometry result to ensure that you're safe to wear a respirator, but you don't have to do a fit test because it is not a fit test because it's non-tight fitting. But you still have to do that. What you do as part of your medical evaluation. But again, right, we're doing spirometry and we're doing fit tests every year because that ASTM F whatever 2019, I don't remember the numbers, says you have to do this every single year for all your employees, right? So your guys are going to get fit tested. Guys and girls are going to get fit tested every year with spirometry. So you got to make sure we're doing that every year. And again, remember, we got to have SOPs for all of that stuff, right? Got to have standard operating procedures for all that stuff, which we're happy to help build for you, right? Help create and customize for you. Be happy to do that. So great questions. Any other questions? I can stick around for a few minutes, but that's all the questions I have. Appreciate you guys coming. Thanks for taking time out of your schedule. This is pretty big stuff, but we're here to help and support you guys any ways that we can. So if you want to stick around, ask me questions, I'll be here for a little bit. Otherwise, appreciate it. We'll do a follow-up email with some of these questions and help get that information out to everybody. So thank you guys. Appreciate it. All right, Nick got a question. All right, Nick, you can shoot. Oh, maybe he's gone.
I was just curious, testing requirements only after you hit the 25 action level, or are they going to be like you're expected to have the fit tests in case these action levels ever get met?
Yeah, you're expected to have it in case they ever get met. Yeah, great question, Nick. Pretty oppressive. Feels like. Yeah. Ron, you're looking good, man. If I can look half as good as you, I'd be doing all right. Anybody else have any questions? Feel free.
Yeah, so DJ, on that note, I'll just kind of a caveat to Nick's comment here. So if we're doing that within the 60 days of hire, in preparation, should we ever reach that action level, that means nobody wears beards or facial hair then ever. Would that be a fair assumption?
We're gonna look like the WNBA. Minors are gonna look like the W. Well, maybe not. Maybe that's not a good example. Maybe women's UFC fighting or something. Maybe that's not a good example. I don't know. I can't do this. Definitely not my family tree. So yeah, unless you're wearing a papper, right? Or you got blades set up, shaving stuff at your facility for all your guys, right? And so that they can be clean shaven at a moment's notice. Good. Any other questions you guys have? Got a few people hanging on still.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Shoot, Bill.
So we have portables that move from pit to pit, maybe 3 or 4 different pits a season. Do I have to do every pit then? Sample them?
Great question, Bill. I'm gonna pull up this my cheat sheet right here, okay? I'm gonna pull this up. I actually put those right here, okay? So to help answer this question, I'm gonna refer directly to page 248 in the standard. MSHA provides 2 examples that illustrate how and why the final rule will affect portable mine operators. In example 1, the portable mine operator conducts first-time sampling at mine site A. The sample result is below that 25 level action limit, right? 1 month later, the portable mine operator moves to mine site B. Very, very common portable crushing operations, right? We work with a bunch of portable crushing operations to help them do sampling and understand their risk and stuff. The operator performs a qualitative evaluation, right? They look at their processing and say, this is very similar to crusher, to what we were doing in pit A, right? The operator determines there's not a trigger for post-evaluation sampling. Within 2 months, right? So 3 months total from that first sample, they must now pull their second sample, right? That second sample comes back and it's also below the 25 microgram action limit, right? At this point, they can discontinue sampling, right? And then you move to mine site C. At that point, right, you trigger another qualitative review and say, is this similar? Are we doing the same jobs, the same guys? They're trained on the same stuff. Is our ore body roughly the same, right? And you say, okay, we don't trigger anything else because we did our qualitative risk assessment and we're good to go, right? If it doesn't, if there's a difference there, right? You may need to sample again. At that point, you may need to sample again and verify that you're still below the 25 microgram action limit, right? In example 2, the portable mine operator is located at mine site X. The portable mine operator conducts a qualitative evaluation, determines the miner's exposures may reasonably be at or above the action level, triggering sampling. The portable mine operator conducts sampling, and the results are above the PEL. At that point, you have to take immediate corrective actions, right? You are put everybody in the next shift in respirators, and you're putting engineering controls in place, right? You're bringing in some water trucks. You got a big water tank now that you got on site, and you're adding some spray bars to your cone or your jaw or whatever you're running, and you're spraying, your ore before it even goes through the crusher, and you're spraying it, throughout, your transfer points and stuff. And at that point, right, you must do it. But they put a special note in here specifically for portable guys like you guys, Bill, and said MSHA encourages portable mine operators to work with their district managers to develop appropriate compliance approach to protect miners' health. And they said MSHA will provide compliance assistance to portable mine operators, whatever that means, right? And it's going to be varied by district by district. So I hope that helped answer your question, Bill. But you can get by with only sampling, 1 or 2 of your pits, and as long as you get below that action level, and then you do your qualitative risk assessment. Every time you move to a new pit, you got to do a new qualitative risk assessment. They very explicitly said in that example. So, great question. Great question. Good. Other questions you guys may have? Somebody else may have. Did I answer your question, Bill? If you had any follow-up, let me know.
No, that was perfect. That was perfect. That's what I assumed. So thank you.
Yeah, but you can't assume with the feds, right? Don't ever assume with the feds.
Yeah, I used to be one, so I know.
Yeah. Nobody knows like Bill. Maybe your wife knows better than you do, but or husband, right? I'm not a judge.
BJ, last thing on the chat, as people are still signing out and hanging around, that Suzanne Paul had a comment, actually a question and a comment. Papper is not considered a means of control, correct?
Correct. Correct.
And then she went on to ask or say, get the thing to scroll down here. Respiratory protection is only until you get engineering under control, or temporary, or I would imagine she meant for a temporary hazardous environment.
Correct. Yep. Only until or you got an upset and this is going to be above, right, the PEL, or is reasonably likely to be above the PEL. You put your guys in respirators, right? You can still wear respirators like you did wear respirators, but you have to know their exposures now, right? You physically need to know their quantitative, right? Their exposures with a number and what they're reasonably likely to be exposed to. Before, we just waited for MSHA to sample, right, to find out if we had issues. That's basically how the law has been written, since 1977. Perfect. Thanks. All right, Nick, you got a question?
Yeah, you said so PAPRs can be used when action is required, but they're not an acceptable long-term solution. So like, let's say we hit the action limit and we have to use PAPRs. Well, how long do we have to correct that? Or do they specify any kind of timelines and like the process that you're taking to resolve the issues?
No, they don't say anything at all about timeframes or anything, but you must show that you are actively working and follow-up sampling to verify, right, that what you're working. So you put stuff in place, and they did put an example in there where you sample a week later. You're trying your controls, sample a week later, right? Because it's going to take you a week to get your results back anyways. You don't even know if what you're doing is actually working. So that's really what I'm going to recommend, is that you put them in you put them in a respirator or PAPR or whatever, because they're above not just the action limit, right? It's the exposure limit. I've heard a couple of confusing questions where they've been brought up. So at the action limit, you do not have to wear a respirator. It's only above the exposure limit of 50 that you actually have to wear a respirator. not the action limit of 25. That answer your question?
Yeah, no, and that makes sense that you would have to be taking, you'd be expected to take corrective measures prior to it hitting the limit at which they need respiratory protection.
Good. Any other questions you guys have? All right, if that's it, I'm gonna peace out. Oh, Bobby had a question. What did it say? Bobby asked a great question on lag times. Yeah, there are going to be issues with lag times for sure. MSHA addressed it. They talked about the standard because everybody brought up questions about that. And they said, we're giving you 2 years for metal, non-metal. Coal, you get a year. That's plenty of time. You can deal with lag times. So there we are. Yep. I wish I could be better about that, but that's what they said in the standard. Great question. Thanks, Bobby. All right. Appreciate you guys. Thank you again. Here's the QR code. You're welcome to set up. A few of you I can see have already set up Calendly invites with me. But appreciate you guys coming, asking great questions. This is an important topic for us. We'll be doing more of this free stuff coming out in the near future as well. We're going to put together a panel early mid-May of experts in the industries to Q&A them with, right? We're going to try and get a doctor actually on that panel as well that already does this kind of stuff for the medical surveillance stuff, so we can get into the weeds and really wrap our head around what this is actually going to mean for us. So stay tuned, and that'll be published on LinkedIn. We'll also do email campaigns, inviting people out to that. So appreciate you guys, though. Anything we can do to support you, please let me know. Super happy to help and get you guys up to speed with expectations and really, how to better protect yourself and prepare yourself for what's going to come down the pipe for us. So, all right. Thank you, guys. I'm going to end this.